anywhere to stay for the night and weren't averse to catching a snooze between screenings in tatty velveteen chairs with a cat crawling on your head and the sickly sweet napalm smell of dope infesting your lungs, pores, hair and clothes. Doing the triple bill packed Scala listings for Time Out alone could put you in the hospital, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. Back in those pre-internet days, the magazine prided itself on being the only reliable source of screening information times, and it literally stood or fell on the quality of its listings. I remember coming into the office one morning and finding Wally freshening up after a night spent at his desk because there simply hadn't been any time to go home. It was like the boot camp out of Full Metal Jacket, only without the guns and the dodgy shots of the Isle of Dogs. Inevitably, the workload at Time Out took its toll on the staff, who would occasionally find solace in the welcoming arms of a liquid lunch. During my brief spell as a TO office boy, I never got used to the phenomenon of watching one particularly talented editor and writer order a bottle of wine with the bill, and then go back to the office where he would put in a solid afternoon's work functioning more creatively, efficiently, and amusingly than I could ever do. I've never been able to drink at lunchtime. The minute alcohol invades my bloodstream, my neurological system gets the message that all work is over and we're on the slow but inexorable road to shutdown. That's what I like about alcohol, the fact that it makes all thoughts of work go away, thereby relieving stress, tension and anxiety in a wonderfully reliable way. But the idea of trying to work after consuming even a half of lager shandy is anathema to me. I'm just not built that way. I am, however, wired up to feel profoundly uncomfortable and horribly guilty about doing any job badly, and despite the handsome reward of the weekly paychecks, when the chips are down, the capitalist bastards will always treat you better than the breast-beating liberals, I knew that I was letting Time Out down. So, after scraping by for a few more weeks, I cornered Jeff in private and told him what he already knew, that I just wasn't up to the job. He agreed, but with great largesse congratulated me on having owned up to my own shortcomings and promised to honour his earlier offer of writing work. He would later tell me that this had been a turning point, that he would have had to fire me had I not offered my own resignation, but that doing so had somehow saved my reputation and made me seem reliably honest rather than just unreliably rubbish. I learned an important lesson too. When it comes to work, always find the door before they show it to you. We agreed to muddle through until someone better could be found to handle listings cover, and I found myself spending more and more time in the Time Out office with little to do other than answer the phones and help out in vague and frankly unspecified ways while filing the occasional film review and getting under Michael's feet, which became my new favourite pastime. This suited me just fine because I got to watch real journalists at work while making some great friends like Nigel Floyd, with whom I would end up going to Russia with disastrous results, more of which in Chapter 5. I also got to review some films, generally low-rent genre stuff, which, as before, provided my passport to proper journalism. You can say what you like about trash cinema. In terms of my career, it has served me better than all the Oscar-winning art in the world. Any idiot can review an acclaimed mainstream blockbuster like Gandhi, which prompted my oft-repeated maxim about Sir Ben Kingsley that when he's good, he's very good, but when he's bad, he's Gandhi. But it takes a special kind of idiot to get the measure of an underfunded piece of gory knockoff schlock, or indeed the sequel to an underfunded piece of gory knockoff schlock. The problem with printed reviews, of course, is that there's something horribly permanent about them, allowing gross misjudgments to be waved in your face years after the initial error has been committed. I've always tended to treat everything that appears in print as some kind of journal of record, and have never quite got my head around the idea that yesterday's news is tomorrow's fish and chip papers. And indeed, in the age of the internet, it isn't, as Julia Roberts so eloquently explains to Hugh Grant in Richard Curtis's oddly enduring Notting Hill. And so it is with a sense of trepidation that I now reach for the weighty Time Out film guide, which would become the ultimate resting place for all the blather that I and many others wrote for the mag in the pressure cooker environment of that steam-driven office. I know that most of what I wrote for City Life wasn't very good, but it also wasn't very widely read, and hasn't been properly archived outside of Andy Spinoza's filing cabinets. So, as long as we all felt good about it at the time, then that's all that really matters. But those early Time Out reviews are still out there in the world, and are indeed accessible online as part of a frighteningly thorough archive of which none of us could have ever dreamed, and for which, therefore, most of us never got paid. But let's stay with print. If memory serves, the first review I ever had published in Time Out was for a cheapy schlocker entitled Watchers. All I can remember about it now is that, as the title suggests, there was a running motif about eyeballs. Other than that, it was fairly unremarkable stuff. Now, the natural tendency when you start reviewing films is to resort immediately to hyperbole, declaring middle-of-the-road fodder to be somehow exceptional because from where you're standing, frankly, it is. I was clearly guilty of this at City Life, and I hadn't entirely grown out of the habit by the time I arrived at Southampton Street. I remember, for example, declaring in Time Out's Sister Magazine 2020 that the Falklands War drama Resurrected was, quote, the most important and indeed difficult film you'll see this year, a brash claim which promptly wound up on the film's poster. It's been to my infinite relief that this comparatively little-seen movie's young director Paul Greengrass has subsequently blossomed into one of the most talented and imitated filmmakers of his generation, helming the hit Bourne sequels and picking up an Oscar nomination for the 9/11 drama United 93. The fact that Greengrass has had such remarkable success, becoming a filmmaker who is bankable and credible on both sides of the Atlantic, makes my untrammeled praise for his debut feature seem uncannily prescient. Indeed, I've never failed to remind Greengrass whenever I bump into him in Soho that I was there first and that therefore he owes his entire movie career to me. Yet the truth is I just got lucky. And the fact that I was so bowled over by a movie which happened to herald a major new talent was more down to good fortune than good judgment. Remember, I'm the guy who predicted, again in print, that in the race for muscle-bound superstardom, Dolph Lundgren would triumph over both Jean-Claude Van Damme and Arnold Schwarzenegger because of the three of them, he was the only one who could do a passable American accent. Dolph and Jean-Claude were recently to be found re-teaming for the action franchise reboot Universal Soldier Regeneration, having both served time in the hellish straight-to-video market. Arnold, meanwhile, runs California. Good call, Kermode. It's partly for this reason that I tend not to revisit my own reviews. The sense of self-loathing and shame is just too much to bear. Sweet heavens, did I really say that? But, flicking through the Time Out film guide, I discover that I pronounced Watchers to be good, cheap nonsense, an assessment by which I'll stand. Elsewhere, the remnants of my work in the guide are marginally less harrowing than I had imagined, which says more about the quality of Time Out's editors than it does about my writing. I did get to have a crack at a couple of mainstream movies, such as Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, Warped Factor 5, boom boom, but the two reviews of which I'm most proud from this period are of solidly marginal fare. Surf Nazis Must Die, which I really hated, and Piranha Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death, which I gave an enthusiastic thumbs up. As I intimated previously, there's really nothing remarkable about being able to identify a proper film like Schindler's List as an important movie about the Holocaust, although the true value of Spielberg's movies is always inversely proportional to their seriousness, hence War of the Worlds is a better film than Munich, in the same way that Jaws beats Schindler's any day. But it's quite another thing to be able to pass judgment on the similarly Third Reich-themed Surf Nazis Must Die, a film whose title announced that it was utter garbage, but which might have actually turned out to be brilliant by mistake, which it didn't. Equally, while everyone quacked on endlessly about how important The Accused was in putting serious gender issues up there on screen, far fewer trumpeted the merits of Piranha Women, which was widely imagined to be an unpolished turd, but which was actually a very witty feminist satire with more to say on the sex war than most films of the 80s. Things were made particularly complicated in this period by the rise of home video and the subsequent expansion of the knowingly trashy and thus allegedly postmodern genre market, which threw up titles like A Nymphoid Barbarian in Dinosaur Hell, where the prehistoric meets the prepubescent, and Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, They Charge an Arm and a Leg. Brand leaders in this area were Troma Films, who'd made a killing distributing the retitled cheapy sleazefest Blood-Sucking Freaks, formerly The Incredible Torture Show, against which our old friends Women Against Pornography had campaigned in the US. Capitalizing on the negative publicity of their early success, Troma had cashed in on the burgeoning belief that some movies, like Ed Wood's infamous Plan 9 from Outer Space, could be so bad they're brilliant, and proceeded to distribute a string of films whose titles suggested rancidly rotten delights aplenty. In some cases, they simply bought off-the-shelf grot and repackaged it for the cult market, like Rabid Grannies, whose protagonists, as Nigel Floyd pointedly observed, were in fact possessed aunties. They were also Belgian, like JCVD, Plastic Bertrand and Tintin, and were originally named Les Mêmes Cannibales. But more importantly, they were rubbish. As was Surf Nazis Must Die, which I described in my characteristically temperate Time Out review as utter horse shit. Even accounting for the lowered expectations engendered by Troma's reputation for unwatchable dreck, Surf Nazis was a massive viewing disappointment, and I'm proud to have said so. By comparison, The Toxic Avenger, in which a janitor falls into a vat of slime and becomes a mop-wielding, melty-headed anti-hero, was almost bearable. Almost, but not quite. Yet to this day, there are airheads who'll tell you that Surf Nazis Must Die is a must-see cult classic, morons who were taken in by Troma's extraordinary talent for hyping junk and who still think there's something hilariously rebellious about watching genuinely terrible films. Part of the reason for Troma's success was the fact that co-founder Lloyd Kaufman was actually a terrific talker who was great fun to be around, unlike his movies. When the National Film Theatre ran a somewhat misjudged Troma retrospective in the early 90s, Kaufman tore the place up, his resemblance to Mel Brooks proving to be more than merely physical. The audience positively rocked with laughter, which was only quelled when one of Lloyd's bloody awful movies started playing. I also had the strange pleasure of interviewing performance artiste and Toxic Avenger sequel star Phoebe Legere, who tried harder than anyone I have ever met to appear zany, madcap and weird, thereby leaving me with the impression that she was fantastically ordinary and a bit dull. Our interview took place on the balcony of a waterfront hotel in Chelsea, where Phoebe greeted me in electric pink leggings and a tutu, a large piano accordion strapped across her chest, which she played whilst unsuccessfully attempting to affect an air of casual insouciance. To her credit, she didn't appear to actually like or even to have seen the Toxic Avenger movies in which she featured, so maybe she was smarter than she seemed. Frankly, if I was promoting movies that bad, I'd take up playing the piano accordion. In truth, despite what the fans tell you, movies which are actually so bad they're brilliant are rarer than hen's teeth and are almost never the result of someone setting out to make a cult movie in the first place. Cross-dressing cult hero Edward D. Wood Jr., now widely hailed as the world's worst filmmaker, seems to have genuinely believed that both Glenn or Glenda and Plan 9 from Outer Space were going to be decent shoestring budget movies and would have been appalled by his posthumous elevation to world-beating crap status. That's what makes Tim Burton's affectionate biopic Ed Wood such a monochrome delight, the fact that its subject, energetically played by Johnny Depp in one of his finest screen roles, is a wild-eyed dreamer rather than a cynical old hack. In the best scene from Ed Wood, Depp's titular anti-hero storms off the set of his latest low-budget disaster because the financiers are interfering with his vision, but his sour mood turns to elation when he spies his hero, Orson Welles, drinking quietly in the darkened corner of a nearby bar. Still attired in full Angora-sweatered drag, Wood strides over to shake Welles' hand and to share his troubles, and rather than laughing at him, Welles offers a sympathetic ear. His own career, the maestro admits, was dogged by studio interference, with Citizen Kane, which critics now regularly label the greatest film ever made, being the only film on which Orson got final cut. But, Welles tells Wood, it's important not to give up, never to abandon your dream or lose sight of your vision. Wood is so fired up by his idol's wise words that he gets straight up and storms back into the studio to make what would become the winner of the Golden Turkey Award for Worst Film Ever. This is the one, beams Depp's Wood with glee. This is the one I'll be remembered for. The only example I can think of in recent years of a film that is genuinely so bad it's brilliant is Mamma Mia, the screen adaptation of the surprise hit stage play in which a collection of ABBA songs are clumsily arranged around a hideously literal narrative to perversely crowd-pleasing effect. I never saw the stage show, although a close friend whose judgment I trust told me after opening night that it was worse than Carrie the musical, a horror film adaptation via Stephen King's novel in which showering high school girls threw tampons at each other while chanting plug it up, to a toe-tapping beat. Carrie the musical was so legendarily terrible that it spawned the catchphrase, not since Carrie, although my friend assured me that this would now be superseded by not since Mamma Mia. But it was not to be. Despite some stinky reviews, Mamma Mia became a smash hit stage play on both sides of the Atlantic, attracting the great and the good with its unique feel-good mix of indescribably bad scriptwriting and indestructibly good pop songs. Meryl Streep has publicly declared that the play helped her get over the trauma of 9/11, its relentlessly escapist